Hello, thank you very much for tuning in. We're going to listen to a call in a moment. Ron calling in from Canada on the 7th of January 2024. He's calling in with a rather unusual, I think, piece of evidence for the existence of God. But before that, quick shout out. I'd like to say good luck to Chloe, who's in Mexico. Good luck with your up and coming TEFL course. I hope it's a good one. Anyway, so moving on. Let's have a listen to this call. Not all of it, probably the last third, and it covers most of the essential points that are made in the call anyway. A lot of the call is just repeating and rehashing what was already introduced as evidence in the first couple of minutes. Let's go.
For why Genesis 1:1 is more likely to be a supernatural origin than natural origin. And if you do, I'd like to know how you calculated or approximated that probability that supernatural is a more likely explanation for the source of Genesis 1:1 than natural. That's interesting.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So Ron has contended that the opening of Genesis 1:1 could only have come from, I don't know, divine source, could only be the word of God, that a human being could not have written in the beginning, the start of the creation myth. He's saying that that must have necessarily come, or at least it's more probable that it came from a divine or supernatural source than from a human being.
You're up.
Well, because the whole book continues that way. The whole book continues with the universal message. If you read two more sentences into the Babylonian myth that your friend mentioned, which is a great point, you could see that it fails very quickly in its state of nature, where the gods start fighting amongst themselves. And they start having kids.
How do you know that's not true?
How do you know that's not true? Because they have offspring. Because gods don't have offspring.
How do you know that's not true? How do you know that's not true?
I don't know it's not true, but it's a very
why are you
natural thing for a human.
Then why are you objecting?
It seems like something that a human would want to create when it talks about the mighty gods vanquishing the weaker gods.
Okay, and it seems like something a human might want to create, that there's a God who knows and loves them and destroys the other gods, just as Yahweh does to the gods of Egypt.
That's a separate point. Maybe that's true too. But I'm talking about the universal creation of the universe, the creation of the universe. There's no more than one God. There's one God.
How do you know that?
God is above nature.
How do you know that?
Based on the text that we're given. According to the Babylonian myth, there are multiple gods.
No, yes, I know that one of the religions that you're talking about is polytheistic, and then there's the Hebrew notion, which is actually henotheistic, that there are in fact other gods, but just Yahweh is the supreme God. But now you're asserting that there's only one God.
Judaism is not
I'm still fucking talking.
Judaism is not
what part of I'm still fucking talking is too difficult for you? Now you're asserting that there's only one God, and I've asked you, and I'm going to ask you again. How do you know there's only one God?
Because I'm using the Bible as the original text. This is the original.
That's a fallacy.
This is the
fallacy.
Yeah, well, this is nothing different really from any other Christian who's called in, made claims which are in alignment with what is in the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then you ask, how do you know this? How do you know that this is true? They just say because it's in the Bible, and they accept the Bible as authoritative, that whatever is in the Bible must necessarily be true. They're giving it that privilege, and really he's doing exactly the same. He came on saying that Genesis 1:1 had to have come from God because it's describing effectively the creation of the universe, and that man at that time, no man at that time, or man or woman a human being could possibly have known that to write it down. Pelagia quite rightly pointed out that there is at least one other creation myth very similar, which predates the Old Testament, and the caller accepted that. But He didn't follow through his logic and revert to the earlier religion. He's sticking to his own God. So yeah, anyway, we'll listen to some more.
See as well. All right, I'm going to mute you since you don't seem to be able to have a conversation at all. It is fallacious for you to say, I'm using the Bible. That's the thing you're trying to prove. Your argument, you're making a case that the Bible is divine. You don't get when you say, because it only points to one God. And when I say, how do you know that there's only one God? And you say, because I'm using the Bible. That's called circular reasoning.
Yeah, excuse me. Years ago, I remember a call coming in 10 years ago on the Atheist Experience. Matt wasn't on, Russell Glasser was on. Somebody from Britain was calling in, I think somebody from Birmingham, and he was a Muslim. And Russell was asking them, how do you know that what you're saying is true? In other words, claims about Allah, etc. And he said, because it's in there, it's in there. And Russell said, where? He said, it's in there, it's in the Quran. I said, well, yeah, but how do you know that what is claimed in the Quran is actually true? And he just kept saying, because it's in there, it's in there, it's in the Quran. Quran is true, it's the word of God, etc., etc. Just going round and round in circles. And we're seeing this guy, he sounds more articulate than that caller, but it really just boils down to the same thing.
You have a non-fallacious argument, a non-obviously stupidly fallacious argument that is supported by evidence.
For the Bible tells me so. That's a cool mug. I like that. I must get one of those.
For your conclusion, yes or no?
If we're gonna talk about God, it has to be by
that was
the
a yes or no
definition of the
question.
first.
Okay, I'm going to mute you again. I've asked you a question. I'm going to ask you again because you seem to be incapable of actually paying attention and answering the question that was asked. Do you have a not stupidly fallacious argument supported by evidence that there is only one God? Yes or no?
The only evidence I have is
yes
the
or no.
first book that describes God. The first book that describes God.
Okay, Ron, I'm muting.
You might as well go into any church, any evangelical church or otherwise, and just go in and listen to all the claims being read out, listen to the sermon, listen to the readings which are presented as absolute truth. And if you ask, how do you know that what is written there is true? They will just tell you, because it's the Bible's the word of God, and therefore the Bible is true, it's infallible, etc. You might as well just go into a church and listen to somebody preaching.
You again. First of all, when I say yes or no, that means the only word that should come out of your fucking mouth first is yes or no. That's how we're going to get the conversation back on track. I'd love to have an open, free-form conversation with you like I could with most other callers, but you seem to have some sort of dirty sock scrubbing around inside of your head that makes it impossible to do that, which is why I've had to put you on mute multiple times in order to get the conversation anywhere near where you're not just fallaciously asserting something. So when I say yes or no, I mean yes or no. But you don't get to then assert that the Bible is the first book about God. And even if it were, that wouldn't prove that it's right about God. I specifically asked if you had a not stupidly fallacious argument supported by evidence, and you immediately ignored the yes or no, and then presented another fallacious argument without supporting evidence. So do you, yes or no, have a not fallacious argument for why there must be one God and only one God?
That wasn't my original argument. My point was the divinity of the Torah.
Goodbye.
The divinity of God. So
goodbye, you dishonest fuck.
Exactly. Weak,
you won't answer
very
yes
weak,
or no.
Very weak.
You know what's
This is the hang-up show. This is the hang-up line? The hang-up?
No, sir. It's not the hang-up line. It's supposed to be where you call in and present arguments for your belief supported by evidence, but you are incapable of actually assessing things fairly and in having a conversation about these things. You keep making fallacious arguments. That's your fault. You're the weak one here. I'm the one identifying fallacies. You're the one spewing them out. You don't get to suggest that I'm the weak one when you're doing that.
Why am I falsely asserting? Why is it false? I'm making a premise. I'm making a syllogism. Why am I falsely asserting
I don't believe that you know what a
the divinity of the
syllogism
Torah?
Is,
Yeah, I haven't heard him make a syllogism at all.
When you make,
Yes.
so if you,
Yes.
Ron, if you were to say the Torah holds that there is one God, well, that's still dubious because there's many people who would view the Torah's view on gods as if it was henotheistic and not monotheistic, which is one of the reasons that Muslims argue that theirs was the first monotheistic religion. I'm not necessarily convinced that theirs is more accurate than that. But when you present a fallacious argument and we point out the fallacy, that doesn't mean you get to keep going. A fallacy means your argument is rendered useless. It means that we cannot establish whether or not your conclusion is true or not. So do you have...
I don't really understand why. 4 minutes ago, I think if you go back in my video, you'll find that Matt said this is circular, and he showed that it's circular. And I don't understand why we're 4 minutes. 4 minutes have elapsed, and we still haven't made any progress. We haven't had any concession that it's circular. We've just had the caller going back and saying it's because the Bible is the word of God, etc. The Bible is obviously divine. He just keeps going back. And when he's asked, what evidence have you got? He says, how do you know this? He says, because it's in the Bible. He's been on this circular merry-go-round, really, for the last 4 or 5 minutes since Matt said it's circular. So I don't understand why there's been no progress.
Have a non-fallacious argument to present for your case? Yes or no?
Yes.
Non-fallacious argument for your case.
Well, he asked him this 2 minutes ago, and he just said the same thing.
Well, I have 120 more examples where
Ron,
the Bible reveals its non-divinity.
Ron, you said you knew what a syllogism
well,
was.
You're calling it...
Ron, okay, I'm fucking muting you now. You're never, ever, ever, ever going to be able to talk over me on my fucking show. Ever. I'm going to unmute you. And when I do, you are going to present a syllogism, because you claim to know what one is, that is not fallacious, that demonstrates your case. Otherwise, we're going to all point at you, call you weak sauce, and let you go. I'm unmuting you now. Please present.
That's a new one on me, weak sauce. I like it. Never heard it before. I'll have to use it myself.
Your syllogism for your case.
Well, I'm making an inductive argument. I'm making an inductive argument, and my inductive argument is strong.
You're weak sauce. So, you're weak sauce, weak sauce, weak sauce, weak sauce. You are a pathetic example of a defender of any faith. You don't know what a syllogism is. You cannot have a conversation. You've presented nothing but assertions and fallacies. You are weak sauce. Goodbye.
There we are. That's it. Weak sauce. Far too much water. No real substance. So, weak sauce indeed. Now, I've often heard Christians, not so much online, Christians online, it's very unusual, in fact, fairly unusual for Christians to call in claiming that only, I hear Muslims saying it sometimes about the Quran, but very rarely hear Christians saying that, for example, only a God could have written the Old Testament, Genesis 1:1, for example. And I know of Christians that I've met in my own personal life who it seems to me, one of the reasons they believe that the Bible is the Word of God is because they're impressed with the, well, I suppose the substance of it, the content of it, and the quality of it. Only a God is so wise. Look at the Sermon on the Mount, look at the Old Testament, look at the Ten Commandments, look at the beauty of the Psalms, all the parables, all the stories, the way that it's all put together. A human being couldn't have done that. Look at the creation story. Everything's in the correct order. No, actually, it's not in the correct order. And they falsely assume that, or presume that only a divine being could have actually either provided the inspiration, could have guided the hand of a man to write this, or indeed wrote that this is actually the Word of God. So no, the case hasn't been made for that. We know that human beings are incredibly inventive. If you go back in time to when the Old Testament is thought to have been composed, there were other advanced writings around at the time, and we just know how incredibly inventive and creative human beings are, and it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that if you went back, say, I don't know, let's say 20 or 30,000 years, prehistoric times, no writings at all, pre-literate societies, there may well have been people who, through some kind of oral tradition, were passing down stories, and some very clever person might have sat down and looked around and said, where did we all come from? Maybe there is some, just like we've got a chief of the tribe, maybe there's some chief of all this, and maybe at some time there was nothing, and that this chief created everything. It doesn't really seem that remarkable that somebody at some time in the past prehistoric times would have actually thought of that. And eventually, when they could write this thing down, we have the Old Testament, we have other creation myths, not just in that culture, but obviously other cultures around the world. So people were asking these questions, and they were trying to come up with answers within obviously what the limitations of the times, with no signs, etc. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now, and bye, Chloe. Goodbye.